Welcome to the forum, and welcome to a conversation with world leaders. I'm Ronald Heifetz, and I'm co-director of the new Center for Public Leadership here at the Kennedy School that's sponsoring this event. The mission of our Center for Public Leadership is to improve the quality of life in communities and societies around the world, and to do this by improving the practice of leadership. One of the ways we intend on improving the practice of leadership is to capture lessons from people who've been there and done it. Of course, nobody succeeds in every aspect of their effort to exercise leadership, but some people succeed admirably in some aspects that deserve not only extraordinary notice and acclaim, but also attention from academics who wish to capture lessons that can then be used for future leaders. And the people that we have with us today have all exercised leadership in quite extraordinary ways. 3 have been peacemakers. 1 generating a peace treaty ending a war that lasted 130 years between Ecuador and Peru, President Mahuad. Another instrumental in ending an awful and bloody series of civil wars in Central America, for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize, President Arias Sanchez of Costa Rica. Not with the assistance of the United States, by the way. And the 3rd, Prime Minister Majali of Jordan, who played a courageous and instrumental role in forming a peace treaty between Israel and Jordan and helping to move that peace process, although it still has a ways to go, forward a step. We have Prime Minister Aho of Finland, who courageously brought Finland into the European Union, and we should hear something about that extraordinary experiment in building an architecture for diversity amongst many nations called the European Union. And finally, we have former Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser of Australia, who quite courageously led an effort to liberate Nelson Mandela from prison and was the first head of state to ever visit him in prison. So tonight, I introduce to you my dean, Joe Nye, who has been the champion of this Center for Public Leadership and absolutely a critical force for leadership here in the school and in bringing these folks to us today. Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. I should say that we think of the mission of the Kennedy School as training public leaders, and therefore to have a group of public leaders such as those on this stage with us is a rare opportunity. And we, with our new Center for Public Leadership with Ron Heifetz and David Gergen are co-chairing, we are trying to derive or distill some of the lessons from the leaders who visit the school. We've been fortunate to have a visit from members of the Interaction Council, a group of former heads of state and government that Malcolm Fraser chairs, and a very distinguished group of experts that have been here with them. And that provides us the occasion for 3 of our guests. And then, of course, Jamal Mawad and Esko Aho have been here at the school this year as fellows of the Institute of Politics and Teaching. So we have a rare opportunity to have a discussion with a very distinguished group of people on some of the questions of leadership. And we're going to keep it quite informal and conversational. In fact, I'm not going to go into long details of their biography because I think it's more interesting just to get straight down to the questions. Jamal, since we are at the Kennedy School, and since you were a graduate of the Kennedy School, does formal training do any good in terms of helping you become a leader?
What a compromise. But we are not going to be quoted, right?
No, this is off the record. Actually, no, in fact, it's on the record because they...
It was one of the most wonderful years in my life, the year I spent here as a Mason Fellow. And it was important in 4 or 5 ways. The first one, because the sense of self-confidence was very strong. You come here, you sense that this is it. You can meet with world figures, teachers, academicians, politicians, and so on. Second, you have a sense of perspective. You can know who you are, how do you place yourself and your country in the context of the world. Third, you learn where you can knock a door to get help in the field that you can need it. Fourth, the sense of network here. You have friends all over the world. They are having the same problems. You are not unique in your problems, and this is very important. And the fifth way, it strengthened my religious beliefs in this very religious place. When I said that, somebody said, but this is a very liberal university. I said, no. If you go there, you will find that some people think that he or she is a god or a goddess.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good line. I'll remember that. Dr. Majali, you had a very different type of training or background. You were Director General of the Royal Medical Services of the Jordanian Armed Forces for more than a decade, and then Minister of Health. To what extent did your medical training help or hurt, or how did you build upon your medical training in terms of leadership?
Well, let me start by saying I never thought that I'll be a politician. I always wanted to be a doctor, a teacher, and an officer, which I have done them, the three of them. Almost at the end of my career, I became in politics. I came into politics. I think the relation between medical education and leadership, I believe it's very strong because understanding the human body and the physiology of the whole body, especially the brain, how does it work? And certainly you have to understand that you are part of a team. And if you are the leader, you are the head of the team, but you have to take care of everybody in the team so you can be successful in whatever you perform. That helped me a great deal in my management in the university as a president of the university for 14 years. And then when I became a prime minister, again, it did help very much in that sense. In the negotiation with Israel, I think the secret of success right from the beginning, I explained to my partner on the other side that I am a scientific man and I hate to be fooled, so please be absolutely frank with me, and whatever bitterness there is in whatever you offer, don't try to put a grain of sugar because you won't find me. He said, I understood that, and we keep on. And this was really kept all through negotiation and made the negotiation successful.
Oscar Arias, you were once a professor before you became a Minister of National Planning and Economic Policy. What skill, where did you get the skills, or what were the skills you needed to get all of the Central American presidents to agree to the Arias peace plan when they were really at loggerheads with each other? What was it that you had that got this very disparate group of people to pull together and agree?
Well, allow me first, Night, to tell the audience, because there are many very young people here, what really happened in Central America in the mid-'80s. I happened to be elected at a time when there was a very bloody conflict in the region. The two superpowers were very much involved. The Soviet Union and Fidel Castro and the whole socialist bloc supporting the guerrillas in El Salvador and Guatemala and the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. And the US administration, President Reagan, was very much involved, also supporting the Salvadorian and Honduran governments, as well as the Contras in Nicaragua. I introduced a peace initiative, a peace plan. It was one of my pledges to the Costa Rican people that if I became elected by the Costa Rican electorate, I would try to look for a diplomatic solution to the war, to the conflict, instead of a military one. And how did I do it? Well, as we should do, the way it needs to be done with strong arguments, with patience, with perseverance, with humility. You need to understand that the other party wants something different from what you want, and then you need to compromise. And the essence of negotiations is to have the humility to be able to compromise in order to reach agreements without any arrogance, trying to impose on the other party or parties whatever is in your mind, and twisting their arms at the end. And perhaps trying to appeal to them that here we were, 5 Central American presidents with the destiny of 30 million people on our hands, and we just simply couldn't fail to them. We were able, against all odds, to reach an agreement in August of 1987, and I believe we changed the destiny of 30 million people. At least we are not killing each other anymore, and we look at the future with more faith and more hope.
Malcolm Fraser, you were part of a group of eminent persons that went to South Africa in 1985 and tried to end apartheid. As Ronnie said, Mandela was then in jail. Tell us a little bit about how you tried to persuade, albeit didn't happen right away, but tried to persuade the people who were entrenched in power in South Africa that they should give up power when that would mean the end of the regime as they knew it. How do you lead in a situation like that where you're asking some people to essentially jump off a cliff from their point of view?
The South African government was already in trouble, and they knew they were in trouble. Living standards were falling. The governor of their Reserve Bank was telling them that the general situation could not continue, so the forces on South Africa were considerable. And without the pressure from outside, without sanctions, I don't think they would have moved or even considered moving. But the first thing we had to do was to try and gain the confidence of 2 quite different groups, the government on the one hand and the African National Congress on the other, part of whom were in South Africa and part of whom were out of South Africa because it was still a banned organization. I'd been given advice that we shouldn't go to South Africa unless we demanded we could see Mandela in jail. We demanded something else and demanded that. Well, I tore up the letter that was written for me because we wouldn't have even got to South Africa if that sort of missile had been sent off. We started very quietly. We told the government we weren't going to speak to the press. We told the government that everything we did, everyone we saw, they would know about. We weren't going to break confidences that individuals might have told us, but they would know who we were seeing. And we told people who were going to see us that the government would know, we're seeing you. And we were able to see a very wide variety of people. And over time, I think the government came to regard us as a group of 4 or 5 people who were trying to help and not trying to hinder. In the end, we defined what the government would have to do and what the African National Congress would have to do before genuine negotiations would take place. On the government's part, they would have to release Mandela and release political prisoners. They would have to unban banned organizations. They would have to lift the emergency and get troops out of the townships. On the African National Congress's part, they would have to suspend violence. We couldn't ask them to promise to end violence because it was in fact the only weapon that they had. And if they'd given up that only weapon, the government would have had no real interest in pursuing the matter. But to indicate good faith, they had to say they would suspend violence. And about 2 years after we were there, both sides accepted the conditions that we'd put down and negotiations began. But the most important part of it all was gaining the trust of both parties. Without that, it wouldn't have been possible. If I could add to it, the first time I saw Mandela, I don't know who your most famous baseball player is, but in some other English-speaking countries, we play a weird game called cricket. And Nelson Mandela said to me, the first question, he stands very straight, he's a formal man, Mr. Fraser, is Donald Bradman still alive? And then he turned to somebody else, to Tony Barber, who was with me, and he said, Lord Barber, I have read somewhere that your mistress, Mrs. Thatcher, now that was not entirely literal, but your mistress, Mrs. Thatcher, has said she could do business with Mr. Gorbachev. Would you please tell her it would be far easier and much, much safer to do business with Nelson Mandela?
Very good.
Very, very good.
Esko Aho, you were elected Prime Minister of Finland when you were 36 years old, I think the youngest Prime Minister in Finland's history. And you managed not only to bring about major economic reforms in the country, but to carry out a major transformative act, which was persuading your country to, your countrymen to join the European Union. Was youth a problem at all for you? I mean, did they say, who was this young fellow to tell us to give up all this history? Or what was it like trying to get Finland into the European Union?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I think you have to remember what was the phase of historic phase when my government started its work, late April 1991. Revolution, peaceful revolution in Europe was at its final stage, and we have to start thinking what is going to be the position of Finland in new Europe, which was created. And quite soon after that, we came to the conclusion that our position must be changed and we have to become member of the European Union. But when government came to that conclusion, my difficulties and difficulties of my government started. We had two fronts. The first front at home, especially in my own party, which had a lot of people who were strongly against the membership. Actually, majority of the supporters of the party, they were against because of the agricultural background and rural background of those people. And it was not very easy to convince these people that we have to make such a step. Another problem was, and there in this job, I believe that it was a positive factor that I was young. I didn't know what kind of consequences there will be. And then there was another front with the European Union. I don't remember who it was, but somebody said that European Union is like a Tarzan, handsome, strong, but poor in communication. And I have to admit that it was like that. So poor in communication meant that it was not enough that you negotiated with Brussels, with the European Union Commission, but you have to have 12 separate negotiations going on with all the member countries present, or that time member countries of the European Union. And that was quite a complicated process. But as a result of that, we made a historic decision to join the Union, and I believe that today most of the Finns, even in my own party, they accept the fact that it was reasonable and good decision too.
It's sometimes said that leaders are born, not made. Actually, at the Kennedy School, we have a very strong vested interest in the opposite proposition. But I also think it's true that many people who may not be a leader at one stage of their life may become a leader at another, or conditions may change so that somebody who looks like they're a successful leader at one time or unsuccessful one time changes. I always think of Winston Churchill, who in 1938 perhaps would have been regarded as a failed Tory politician, and 2 years later was the savior of his country, and the context changed, obviously. So it'd be interesting to know, going back earlier in lives, what was it that essentially gave you the skills that made you a successful leader? What were the things in your early life that made you think, well, I can do this, I can persuade others to do things, I can move people to higher goals? Is there anything that stands out in your mind as to how you became a leader or what led you in that direction? Maybe we'll start with Malcolm Fraser.
In my case, it was partly accidental, but I'd studied modern greats at another university with some reputation, and when I obviously had an interest in politics. I had a grandfather who had been a foundation senator and at all the conferences which led to Federation of Australia. And so some of it, I suppose, was in the genes. But then the seat for which I would naturally stand if I was going to stand when I was 23 fell vacant, and it was held by the political enemy, and it had been held by the political enemy for most of the seat's life. And somebody said, would I throw my hat in the ring? I said, you won't get pre-selection because a president of your party is going to stand also. I said, all right, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And then about a week later, I said, what's the point of throwing my hat in the ring if I don't try and win the pre-selection, the nomination? And so I won the nomination, and I won the seat. And that was really all an accident. It wasn't meant to happen. And it didn't fit in well with being a farmer in any case. There was no time left for farming. Education certainly had a role, and what I learnt at university was obviously very helpful because I'd studied different systems. I knew, or thought I knew, as other people think they know now, a little of economics. As I've got older, I begin to think that I'm not sure who knows anything about economics. But to be successful, I think you have to have, in my case anyway, some kind of conviction of where you want to go, some kind of understanding of what your people will accept. But it's got to be in your own gut, it's got to be in your own heart. I couldn't have ever led by calculation, if you like, by a degree of passion, of conviction. Now, for other people, I think the different motivations, different reasons. But it was an odd world. Nearly 50 years ago, there'd been communism is, what is it? It's nothing. But Indonesia nearly got taken over by a communist coup. 20 seconds, and the general who stopped it and beat the coup escaped. 20 seconds, and he would have had his throat cut, and then the PKI and communist aid would have governed Indonesia almost certainly. There was a communist insurrection in Malaysia that went on for 11 years. It was a very difficult world, and there were deep divisions. There were philosophical divisions in the political parties in Australia which don't exist today, and I think we're a healthier country because they don't exist. It's more like Democrat and Republican, or I'm not sure if I should say that or not. People don't fear one side or the other being in power, and I think that's healthy. They might think they'll make mistakes, but it's not going to destroy society. But to me, there wasn't any one particular thing. Education clearly had something to do with it. I think something in the genes, but also a belief in what I wanted to achieve, what I wanted to do, which was probably the most important part of it.
Oscar Arias, what happened or didn't happen in your early life that would explain your call to leadership?
Well, I used to say in my campaign that the first time I wanted to become president of my country, it was when I was in my mother's womb. Since I was a child, I used to read a lot, mainly biographies of great statesmen, from Napoleon and Bismarck to Churchill and de Gaulle and Truman and Roosevelt and everybody. Disraeli and Gladstone and everybody. Eventually, I got prepared to become a politician. I was very impressed when, at the age of 17 years, I met Robert F. Kennedy in Hyannisport. From him, I learned that the essence of leadership is to tell people what people need to know and not what people want to hear. That the essence of government is to educate, just like academia. It's not the monopoly of faculty professors to educate, but also of statesmen. And then when I became president, it was necessity. I believe in peace not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. I had to choose between a military solution to that conflict or introducing a peace initiative, which would allow us 5 Central American presidents to sit around a table and negotiate in a civilized way, the way problems, conflicts, wars need to be solved. I do deplore the fact that many countries resort to the use of military force too quickly to solve conflicts, not even trying, as I said before, with patience, with perseverance, with humility, diplomatic ways to solve conflicts. So I never dreamed of becoming a pacifier in my life. I was forced to do it. Costa Rica is a tiny country in the middle of a small region, and I had pledged to the Costa Rican people, well, what everybody, what all politicians offer, more jobs, more economic growth, more this, more that. And suddenly I wonder, well, how can I accomplish this in the middle of a bloody war? I cannot isolate Costa Rica from my neighbors, so I need to pacify the whole region. So I told the Costa Rican people, well, it's not enough to be neutral. We claim to be neutral, but Costa Rican territory was being used by the Contras. The first thing I did was to get rid of all the comandantes who were living in my country, and they left, and some of them went back to Nicaragua, not to Nicaragua, I'm sorry, to Miami, and the rest went to some other place. And so I was forced to do it. I mean, I thought to be neutral was not enough. I wanted to become an active agent in looking for peace. And I used to tell the Central Americans, I'm going to go and visit you and try to persuade you and preach peace because I don't want you to come to Costa Rican territory and preach war. So that's the way it happened.
Esco, if you look back toward your early life, what shaped you to being a leader?
One good friend of mine, he's an author, and he has said sometimes that in your life there are a lot of crossings, but only one road. And I think there are many coincidences that you have become party leader or prime minister, but you have to have also personal conviction that you need also Nokia phone.
Spoken like a true patriot.
Yeah, that's correct. So you need coincidences, lucky coincidences too. But but the background in my life, maybe the first time I felt that this is something I'm interested in, it was in the age of 7 or 8. I was born in a farm, so my father and mother, they were farmers. We had a small farm, and that tradition was, at least in Finland, that children started to work very early, in the age of 5, 6, as soon as we were able to do something and assist our parents. But then I noticed that there are upstairs in our old house, there are papers which my grandfather, who was active in political life, had left. And I went upstairs there and started to read these. And then I noticed that sometimes I could avoid working in the farm when staying there and reading. And I really felt from the beginning that there is something which is interesting for me and was inspiring me to read and to even to write later on. So if it's like Mr. Fraser said, that it's in genes, but in a way I feel that there was a virus which I was able to get there, and since that I started to become active. Another important coincidence was that I was at school in the late 60s, in the beginning of 70s, and like in the United States, almost all over the world, that was the period of time when people were very active, and even young people wanted to change the world, and I was part of that generation too.
Dr. Vajali, if you were asked the same question, can you look back and see something that particularly pushed you toward leadership?
Yes, I think so. First, I agree with Mr. Fraser that it is in the genes. But when it blooms, this depends on many things. First, somebody to discover it, if there is a need to discover, and somebody to give it the chance and to help nourishing it. I remember when I was almost 7 years old, I am a child of 14. We are 14 in the family, and my number is 6, I think. So, but my father, who was a tax collector, whenever he has guests, and almost every other night he has guests, he makes us sit with him and listen to his friends and what they are talking. Certainly they are talking of the community and what have you. So at that time we may not have liked it very much, but it grew with us. And I was the beloved of my father out of the 14, with another brother of mine who was younger, who is now the Speaker of the Parliament. Both we are the beloved of father. But I remember just before he died, a friend of mine who was a doctor, he asked him, "Do you want anything special for Abdus Salam?" He said, "No, I am sure when I pass away, he's going to take the reins and look after all his brothers and sisters." And certainly after he died, I took the responsibility for something about 100 people, though I was just about 20 years old. So that responsibility again got me into working hard. And even in my youth, I always mixed with people who are elder than myself. And I think I learned a lot from that.
Jamal Mawad, what would you say were the early influences that pushed you toward leadership?
I tend to think that leadership is a combination, Joe, of personal characteristics and the context, both of them. As Esco said, probably it will be very difficult to make Tarzan a good communicator. So you need some personal traits. But at the same time, the context is so important that the mood of a population in a country changes every day. So sometimes the same candidate can win an election and lose the other. I like to use this metaphor as a leader as a surfer. So you can recognize a very good wave and to put yourself on top of that. And then, if you are skilled enough, you come with a wave, and that's perfect because you are part of the process. You understand what's going on. You are going with all the others. But sometimes you cannot recognize a good wave, or the wave just changes suddenly, or you cannot come to the top, or you cannot have the skill to be there, so you are crushed, and you are dragged, and you go to the sand. And that is the risk that you are always facing. And yes, I was born in a very small city, an inner city in my country. We have a very diverse country, probably the highest diversity in Latin America. I traveled to other cities, and I found how different we were. So I understood that we have different voices, and it is very important to have a voice and to speak up out. And I found that you have two responsibilities. One is with yourself, to be authentic, and the other is with the community. And this is a sort of balance. And it is a process that just developed, I think. If we listen at the personal stories here, they are very diverse, all of them, and it happens all over the world. You don't have two similar biographies, probably. So everybody has an opportunity. And it depends how you are going on with this.
Let me ask a different type of question. I'll start with you, Esco. How do you play? How do you relax? And does that have anything to do with being a leader? The informal side of life.
I think it's very important, especially in critical phases. I had several of them, not only because of economic problems we had. 1991, when my government started, we had economic growth level of -7. You can imagine what does it mean for a government and decision making. We had a lot of crisis situations. And then the same year later, in August 1991, there was a coup attempt in the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union disappeared. I don't know if I had any influence on that, but in any case, that happened. And then we had this negotiations on membership in the European Union. And sometimes all these three projects, major projects, they were making very difficult, tough situations simultaneously. Then I decided sometimes to get out of that mess. And there were two opportunities for me. First one was my family. So your own family. It's like Ronnie Heifetz said sometimes that you need anchors. I think it is very important anchor for a politician. You can survive in a very difficult situations if you are able to go to your family and you are protected. You are protected against media, against your competitors there. And now I will tell you a secret which is not known in Finland. I hope that it's going to be kept here. Sometimes I'm playing poker and it was also a very good way to relax. By the way, and to win too.
Very good. Oscar, how would you answer that same question?
My favorite sport has been swimming. I suffer from asthma since I was a kid, so I was asked to swim. Then I like to read. I like to listen to music, both classical music as well as Latin American music. I'm a tango aficionado. I love tango. I like, I like poetry. I like from Darío to Neruda, from Whitman to Robert Frost or Auden, from Shakespeare to Tennyson and also the German poets. But how I do relax? Well, certainly one relaxes much more reading poetry than reading politics or what politicians have to say. They never have to say anything intelligent. Yeah, that's it.
Malcolm, when you were Prime Minister, I imagine your days were pretty full with work. What did you do to relax?
Well, often I wouldn't, but when I could, I'd go fishing. And I like going fishing in northern Canada or Alaska, best of all, which, since both were a long way from Australia, meant I didn't go fishing all that much. But there were closer places, and I found that it's a good excuse to look at some nice countryside and get away quietly. I'd play golf, I'd play tennis, I'd read. Fishing is probably my favorite relaxation.
Sounds good to me. Jamal, how about you?
Aside from coming to the Kennedy School,
Which is just relaxation.
relaxation, yes. I used to play tennis, and I like to watch sports on TV. It's a great way to relaxation for me. And I used to meditate and to read those things.
Dr. Majali, both as a leader but also as a doctor, is relaxation essential to leaders? In other words, particularly in periods of high tension, high crisis, where you could either say, I devote all my time to solving this crisis, or I will break out some time and spend it on a hobby or doing something to make myself relax. Both medically and in your personal experience as a leader, what's the answer to that?
Well, first, I think being a person who relax or tense is again in the genes. And certainly it would be helped by training and so on and so forth. It happened that I am now over 75. I don't think I have missed a night of worry, never worried, in spite of being studying medicine, exams, wars, etc., etc. Not a single day. I just put in fact now if I am not in front of this crowd, if I just close my eyes, I sleep.
Very good.
So I think certainly relaxation is a great thing, and relaxation comes from when you are clear of what you want and clear of what you are doing and honest of what you are doing. I think there is nothing what makes you otherwise. I remember late His Majesty King Hussein, especially during the negotiation, and every time he looks at me, he said, Abdul Salam, how is it you don't worry just like us? Why you are not worried? Why you are not agitated and nervous about this and that and the other? I said, sir, if you worried, you just make yourself with more headaches. Otherwise, just leave it. It will go, and it will go. Just relax. That's it.
That's great. Esko, you wanted to add a footnote on this.
Yeah, I fully agree that
And playing cards, as he said, I play almost 2-3 hours a day.
I hope you win.
yeah.
No money. Free of charge.
I was just asking, what are you doing this evening later? But I had a comment in my mind related with sleeping. I think in that kind of situation, crisis situation, the most important thing for a leader is to be able to relax in a way that you can sleep. I have one example of that kind of situation, maybe most critical in my 4 years as a prime minister. It was August 1991 when we had coup attempt in Soviet Union. And as you know, we have common border with the Soviet Union and today Russia, which is more than 800 miles of common border. And that's why we were all the time quite worried what is going to happen there. And it was Tuesday, it started Monday morning, and Tuesday evening was the most critical phase. And 2 o'clock in the night, I got the information that shooting started in Moscow. And then I had to decide what to do now, to start to, or to continue waiting for additional information, or to start to sleep and to be ready to meet the situation, whatever, next morning. And my decision was to sleep, because I felt that I cannot do anything, but the next morning my brains and my skills will be needed, and I'm much better to deal that situation if I have slept for 5 hours, as I did.
Good advice. I'm tempted to ask another question. I'll just mention it, but because it's time for questions from the audience, and the microphones are here in the balcony, I'll mention this in hopes that maybe somebody in the audience might ask it, which is, in the age of the internet, are we going to need different characteristics from leaders? And are the types of work and play that young people do today, focused around computers, are those going to have effects on the type of leadership we'll have? But if we all answered that, we wouldn't get to audience participation, and one of the key things in these forums is indeed to get the audience participation. So I'll just put that in the back of people's minds. Instead, we'll turn, there are microphones on both sides of the floor, microphones in the balcony. We'll rotate them among them. So let's start here. I'd like you to identify yourself so that people know who's asking the question, your relationship to the university, and also to keep your question relatively brief.
Yes, hi, my name is Kelly Fujoshi, and I graduated from the Kennedy School. And my question is to all the panelists. In your experience, as well as your experience relating to other leaders, and perhaps even from reading biographies or newspapers, accounts, whatever, what do you think are the most common and most severe or tragic mistakes that leaders make?
We'll have to be, when the whole panel is asked, we'll have to be sort of very quick in our answers, 30 seconds each. So, Esko, we'll just go right down the line. Most common and tragic mistakes that leaders make.
I have a very short answer. The main mistake is that you believe that you are able to do whatsoever, so that you overestimate your skills and your abilities.
Not to follow your convictions, your values, your intimate ethics, to try to please instead of try to lead. The essence of leadership is, with your excuse, not to try to climb on top of the wave, but to change reality if that is what is needed. Not to do the things which are popular according to polls, not to please public opinion, but to do what your convictions tell you you need to do.
Malcolm?
The most common mistake is to underestimate the intelligence and good judgment of ordinary people.
Jamal?
Yes, I would say omnipotence, the sense that you are over everybody else. And I agree with Oscar. What I try to say is that you have two possible extreme scenarios. The first in which you are going with the people and there's an agreement, and the other one in which you are alone and the wave crashes you. I agree.
Dr. Majali?
I think the mistake is that you are one-sided and you do not see the other people's point of view and put them in the same shoes like you are in and deal with that accordingly.
All right, let's go to the other microphone on the floor.
Okay, my name is Jorge Urrutia. I was born and raised in Guatemala. And my question is actually directed to President Arias. And the question is, when you were making this effort to bring the peace process to Central America, what kind of reaction did you get from the other 4 presidents from the Central American nations?
It wasn't easy at the very beginning tried to persuade them to support my peace initiative, mainly because of the pressure on the Sandinista government from the Soviet Union and Fidel Castro. You might remember that the essence of my peace initiative was democracy as a precondition for peace, and that implied that the Sandinistas would have to hold elections, free elections and fair elections, if they would agree with my peace initiative. On the other hand, the Reagan administration put a lot of pressure on President Duarte and Ascona in Honduras because they were very much against my peace initiative. The Reagan administration claimed it had no teeth and it was not worth it to support it. So again, as I said before, I appeal to our responsibility for putting an end to the war and giving 30 million Central Americans a much better future.
On the left balcony up there.
Hi, my name is Anita Murthy, and my question revolves around leadership and ethics. What do you do? What is the thought process that you take when you're faced with a difficult choice that has to do with conflicting, like what your values are versus what you need to do? And how do you sort of work through what decision you need to make in that situation?
Excellent question, and it's going to have to be answered briefly because I think it would be more interesting to have every member of the panel give a short answer. So, Dr. Majali, we'll start with you and work down the line. Quickly, how do you answer?
I think you have to keep to your ethics. Principles are very, very important.
Jamal?
The same, to find the best rational alternative and to match that with your way of thinking and with who you are and who you believe in. This is very important. And if the people is not in agreement with you, you are elected to make decisions based on these things. When the people is voting in an election, you have some proposals, which are the proposals that you made with your words, but they see in you a lot of personal characteristics. And one of those should be that you are in the capability of making tough decisions when they are necessary.
The first step, I believe, is to try and understand fully what the situation is and to make sure that the people advising you have advised you accurately and you understand the facts. And if there are two sides to an issue, that you understand the facts on both sides of the issue. That, I think, is sometimes the hardest thing to do because there are a lot of people who have a vested interest in seeing that a leader does not have full facts on a particular issue. And then, knowing that, just do what you think's right.
Asha?
Yeah, just do what you think is right, do what you think is necessary, not because it is easy. Don't try to please people. Follow your convictions, your value system, your ethics, your ideals. And don't be afraid of becoming unpopular. Do what your conscience tells you is right.
Esko?
One professor from India had such kind of phrase that there are dealership and leadership in politics. And I think it's a very good illustration. You need leadership in certain cases when you have conflicting interests. And you have to understand that there are several choices you have to between which you have to choose. And I think finally you have to rely on your own consciousness and your own values and to take the responsibility in that way.
Right side of the balcony.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Kravitz, and I'm a graduate of the Kennedy School, and my question is directed to President Arias. I'm wondering if you could comment on who do you see as other Central American leaders, either dead or preferably alive today, and if you might just comment on them.
To me?
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was for you. Sorry, who do I see?
Who do you see as leaders in Central America, either past leaders or preferably, present day, people who are alive today, who are leaders in Central America, and if you might just comment about them?
Perhaps one of the greatest Central Americans was a man by the name of Francisco Morazan, who had the courage and the wisdom and the vision to try to unify Central America. As we are all aware, one of the main problems of the Latin American countries is the fact that Simón Bolívar, even though he's a national hero for the Venezuelans and a Latin American hero for all of us, he was no Thomas Jefferson. So this man, Morazan, tried to unify the 5 Central American presidents, and he was finally murdered, and certainly since then, I don't think we have a great statesman in Central America. Perhaps the other exception would be Jose Figueres, another person with a great vision and wisdom and courage. Again, was able to get rid of the armed forces in 1948 in Costa Rica, telling the rest of the world that what we did is something which is not a utopia and can be done and needs to be done, because certainly the money that we spend on arms and soldiers should be much better spent building health clinics and schools for our children.
Yeah, I have a very simple question for each.
But I know who you are, but you got to tell them who you are.
Sorry, yeah. My name is Yili Huazhen. I'm from China, and I'm a mid-career student, MPA student here at the Kennedy School of Government. And my question is very simple for each of our world leaders, including our deny. The question is, which leader in the world do you admire most? Whom you might take as your role model, and why? Thank you.
Good hard question. You mean a contemporary leader, somebody alive today?
No.
Or history leader, in history?
Any maybe.
Any leader, okay.
But the best
right.
is a leader alive.
All right, why don't we start with Dr. Majali? We say, I would say other than King Hussein.
Well, I think it is King Hussein, King Hussein, King Hussein. No doubt he was a great leader, and I think Mr. Churchill was a great leader, at least in this decade.
Mahatma Gandhi. He is difficult to see him as a role model for Latin America in the situation in which we are now, but he is my preferred leader.
Mandela. Nobody has spent 27 years in jail and emerged with the friendship and respect of his jailers without any sense of bitterness, without any sense of hatred or sourness, with a totally Christian attitude to everyone about them. To be not scarred by those 27 years, especially the 22 years in Robben Island, which would have been like some sort of hellhole somewhere. There have been a lot in many places, that was one of them. It was quite extraordinary. And he's still a living example to everyone.
Lincoln, Gandhi, and Churchill, for obvious reasons.
If you ask me to take from the history a person, I think it's Churchill, for many reasons. But of those politicians I've met personally, the most impressive has been Nelson Mandela. I don't have to repeat what has already been said.
Yeah, and I would say that Lincoln is the person historically who impresses me most. The way he dealt with adversity, defeat after defeat, while keeping his ideals, combining pragmatism with a sense of direction and idealism, is probably the most admirable historical figure. But of contemporary figures, I agree with Malcolm Fraser. I think Mandela's ability to lead his country without bitterness and toward reconciliation is quite extraordinary.
Thank you very much.
Here comes my internet question, I hope.
Exactly. My name is Phil Noble, and I'm a fellow at the Institute of Politics, and I'm studying impact of internet on the future of democracy, and particular leadership. But I'm going to cheat because Esco and Jamil, I'm having lunch with you next week and you later. So I want to ask the other three, what do you see as the impact of the internet in the democratic process in the future and the new communications technology, but especially on leadership? What's the impact going to have of this medium on global leadership?
Well, I believe it is almost like any arms. It could be for the good, it could be for the bad. Like a pistol, you can kill yourself or you defend yourself. So it depends who is the user. If the user is wise, I think it will be great. But if the user is not wise, it's going to hurt him.
Jamal, Malcolm, you're next because Jamal's going to get a private quiz.
Jamal and Esco are going to get it next week.
It's a great source of information if you know how to use it reasonably well. But a leader ought to be able to get information without it. Since I've been out of office, I've been able to get information out of the internet that I couldn't get out of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs. I wanted to know about Myra Markovich's political party. The Department of Foreign Affairs gave me 70 pages that they took off the internet, but the only trouble was it was about the wrong political party. So it's useful, but I don't know that it makes fundamental changes. It makes access to information easier. But leaders ought to have themselves organized so that they're properly advised anyway.
Oscar?
Well, it's a wonderful educational tool and very useful for reaching information in matter of seconds instead of looking at the old encyclopedias, etc. But just allow me to tell you, while you talk here of the digital divide at Harvard, our concern in the poor countries of the world, in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, is the educational divide. I mean, we are not educating our children. We are not sending our children not even to elementary school, much less to high school. They have no access to internet, to computers. And a small minority which has access are those attending a few public schools or private schools, and certainly in the Buddhist communities in Latin America or Asia or Africa, if there are schools, there is no electricity in those schools. So our main concern is 1 billion people who are illiterate.
Great. Would you answer, Joe?
Well, my answer would be the leader can use it to get more information for himself or herself. But I think the other piece that's equally important is that the people you're trying to lead are going to be empowered in a way that they've never been before by the availability of information to them. And the leader who really wants to lead has to realize, in the internet age, has to realize that the people they're leading are going to have much more information than they've ever had before. And to the extent that information is power, power is more dispersed, and it takes a different style of leadership to lead a people that is broadly informed than a people that is not as well informed. So I think it's not just what you learn yourself, it's realizing that the people you're trying to lead are going to know a lot more. So there are two halves to it. In the balcony on the left side of the
Hi, my name is Prasad Bhambre, and I'm thinking about applying to the Kennedy School.
This may deter you.
Okay. I guess today we heard what it takes to be a leader, good genes, the ability to surf, and a few other things. But I think we tend to confuse the difference between politicians and leaders. And I was wondering if the members of the panel would further elaborate on the differences and also point to contemporary examples where good politicians have metamorphosed into good leaders.
Esko, do you want to try that? Is there a difference between politicians and leaders? How do they relate? How does being a successful politician relate to being a successful leader?
Quite often it happens that people will be changed or are going to be changed when they become to certain positions. So sometimes you learn a lot from the position you have, and that's why it's very difficult to say beforehand who is going to be a good leader and who is not. In many cases, if you look at the history, persons who were not expected to become big leaders or leaders have been able to do that. And sometimes, for example, when you look at the United States history, presidents who had resources to become good presidents, they have not been able to do that. I could take several examples, but to be short, not to do that. But then it has something to do with the former answer also to question of internet. I think the final decision the leader is going to make or is making, it is not based on only information, but on intuition. And that intuition is something which is collecting all your experiences, all your information you have, but then you need also that additional ability to be able to see future opportunities and risks, and you can take the lead. And advisors are good, but I think sometimes it is really true that, like one person introduced himself, he said that, I'm not an expert, I'm an advisor. And that is completely true in certain situations.
Oscar, is there tension between being a good politician and being a good leader?
Yeah, I think perhaps we could take President Kennedy's line. People who tell politicians are, or leaders are the ones who tell people what people need to know. That is, who know quite well that they need to educate the people, because that's the essence of government. And politicians, since they only want to remain being politicians so the rest of their lives and be reelected, they try to please people. The essence of leadership is to do what needs to be done according to your values, according to your convictions. And forget about if whatever you want to do is popular. If it isn't popular, make it popular. Try to persuade the people that this is what needs to be done. I think that is an essential difference between politicians and real leaders.
In any group of people, the majority will not be able to lead. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's in a university or in a group of politicians. In the Australian Parliament, there are probably about 140 people in the House of Representatives. The Prime Minister comes out of the House of Representatives. If Australia has 2 or 3 people at the most who have the qualities to be a Prime Minister to lead the country, then Australia will be lucky. And in the House of Commons, which is over 600 people in Britain, if they had 3 or 4 people with the qualities to be Prime Minister, but very often you can look at the House of Commons and you can't see anyone who you think would be a good Prime Minister. So you're a politician first in the Westminster system, and then because of the things that have been said here on each side of me and that I've said, leaders will act in certain ways and politicians just won't make the grade.
Jamal?
I was thinking about the previous question. Who were the leaders that we admire? And all of we said the name of a politician. I mean, a man that was in politics, or Gandhi, or Mandela, or Churchill, or Hussein. So probably those 2 concepts are not contradictory. You can have a good politician and a good leader, and you can have neither of them or just one of them.
But a good leader has to first be a good politician, or he won't be able to stay as leader.
Yeah, that's a very important thing.
Again, the word leader, leader in politics, leader in profession, leader in many other professions. Every profession has leader in its own way. But certainly the leader on the level of a prime minister or president has to be cultured in many other fields to be able to get the grip in his own hand. He has to be enough knowledge, enough culture of other fields to be able to do it. So the more information, the more knowledge he has, the more he would be able to lead his own people to the good of what he believes for his own people.
Can I mention one other thing about leadership? Because I think, to me, it's very important, and none of us have mentioned it. I've met people who can deal with one subject at a time, and if that subject is worrying them, they can't think of anything else until it's over, whether it's going to take a day, 2 or 3 days to make a decision. Somebody who's a good leader, I believe, has to be able to handle a great many subjects in the course of a day, and while he's handling any one of those, give it his total and absolute attention. But then when that's off his plate, he has to be able to move and grasp the intricacies of something in quite a different area of government or of public life. So he's got to have a versatile mind that can turn its attention very quickly from one thing to another, not superficially, being able to go in depth to something and then move in depth to something else. And if you're a one-track person, you can't be a good leader because the whole system will just bog down.
Eske, you wanted to add on that?
In one aspect, I think good leader is also able to make decisions rapidly in a very complicated situation. That is one requirement. And that's why quite often, if you ask who is a good leader, national leader or international leader, quite often these persons have been leading their countries or nations in wartime.
Right side of the balcony.
My name is Chris Blattman. I'm a graduate student here at the Kennedy School. All of you have had experience leading through conflict and reconciliation, and perhaps at this point we stand at a juncture where an old superpower, the US, and a new superpower, China, are at a potential point of conflict and reconciliation, not just in regards to the current crisis, but in a larger respect. What advice would you give to the leaders of both countries if you had the opportunity?
Let me ask Malcolm Fraser to answer that one, because we're now running out of time and we can't have everybody answer everything, and you live closest to the problem.
This is backtracking because certain steps have already been taken. But if the leaders of both countries had said to somebody down the line a bit, but somebody with enough authority, you fix it without a fuss. Without loss of face, but without a fuss. And if that was said on both sides, it's a time for cool heads, for quiet minds. but it's not something that should be elevated to the highest levels of government.
And again, a short question, perhaps focused on one rather than all of the panel.
That's what I was planning to do.
Good.
My name's Andrew Lee. I'm in the MPA program. I had a question for Mr. Fraser. You're often described as one of Australia's greatest former prime ministers, or ex-prime ministers, in all that you've done since you left office. Oddly enough, in the same way in which President Carter is in this country, and you both served at around the same time. What do you think it is that makes a great ex-leader? What's the secret of the transition?
I really can't answer that. Many of the things I started in government, I've continued to be involved in since. The pursuit of human rights was one of the major activities in government. Balancing the budget was also one of the major activities in government. Afterwards, I've spent a lot of time in humanitarian activities, time with the Interaction Council. Not enough time making money. I don't know. It's the sort of question I normally say if I was in office. Other people have to make their judgments about that. They've got to make up their minds because they're saying something about me, so whatever I say won't influence them. They'll know what they think.
Sometimes sometimes bad politicians, or quite often bad politicians, are becoming good ex-leaders.
Yep. Emmanuel, you have the last question.
Was that a pointed remark?
he was thinking of the American context only.
Well, that's all right then.
Maybe also Scandinavian tradition. Yeah. Maybe too.
Finland is forgiven.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel Seidner. I am from Guatemala, and I am a student here at the Kennedy School of Government. And it's a short question. What is your role now as leaders in the world? Once you left the office, what is your role now?
In today's world, after the end of the Cold War, with communism dead, and that doesn't mean that democracy has triumphed. My interest is in trying to help poor countries to alleviate their poverty. And I have my own instruments to do that. I think we live in a world now at the beginning of the 21st century with an ethics that is completely wrong. Too much cynicism, too much hypocrisy, too much greed, too much individualism. Certainly we need more solidarity, more compassion, more love. And that is not going to be, we won't be able to do that in 1 or 2 generations. So something very concrete is to try to persuade poor governments to stop spending our scarce resources on the military, on big armaments, buying unnecessary weapons, which are only used in Africa, in our part of the world, in your own country, to oppress our own people, like in Chile, like in Ecuador, like in Peru, like in Guatemala, in order to free resources for the education of our children. In a country like yours, forgive me for telling you what you know already, but for the rest of the audience, I don't think that more than 20-25% of the children between 13 and 16 years of age are attending high school. So I don't see how in a country like Guatemala, which does very poorly in the Human Development Index, you should have a huge armed forces like you do. And this is true for many Latin American countries, Asian countries. I think it's the denial of leadership, for instance, for a country like India with 400 billion people who don't know how to read and write, to spend their scarce resources on nuclear weapons. And this is true, of course, for the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. So finally, I've been pushing an international code of conduct on arms transfers because I wouldn't like the exporters of arms to keep sending arms to countries like those in Africa or the Buddhist countries of our part of the world.
Before I ask you to thank our leaders on the stage tonight, let me call on another fine leader, Senator David Pryor, who is the director of the Institute of Politics, and he's going to say something about a panel with the board of the Institute of Politics next Monday, which is a natural follow-on to tonight's discussion. David?
Dean Knight, thank you for letting me mention this as an announcement. 2:30 Monday afternoon, right here. We hope all of you will come back. As we have had the opportunity to hear these world leaders in the forum, what a grand opportunity this has been. We're going to hear and have the opportunity, I should say, on Monday at 2:30, an opportunity to hear some local or domestic or national leaders. John Culver, former senator from Iowa, who chairs the Institute of Politics Senior Advisory Committee, Senator Ted Kennedy, Senator Chuck Hagel, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Warren Rudman, former senator from New Hampshire, Philip Sharp, now with the Kennedy School, former congressman from the state of Indiana, and Gwen Eiffel will be our moderator. Gwen Eiffel, as you know, does the News Hour with Jim Larrell. We will be right here at 2:30 from 2:30 till 4, and we really think that we have an outstanding program for you, and I can tell you this has been a most outstanding program that you, Dean, and I have brought us this afternoon with these great people. Thank you very, very much.
Since the leaders who are with us tonight have, even as ex-leaders, had distinguished careers, and some of them may even have future careers in government, we hope, we will invite you all back and hope that they will rejoin us in another year when the Interaction Council meets here. And in the meantime, we wish you all well for the evening. Thank you.